culture eats strategy for breakfast.
What do you mean by that?
Maybe you're on the wrong user needs model, or you're doing something wrong. Because
why do we need these frameworks?
And that's the benefit of being a DJ, because the audience is right in front of you.
You used to be a DJ, didn't you? Meet Lars Jensen, the audience lead at Berlingske Media. With over 15 years in journalism and digital strategy, at Berlingske he's been instrumental in implementing the user needs framework.
So we did a check-in with all of the editors at Berlingske, and we asked them 2 questions.
Which user need card do you pick for your content? You're about to find out. I can tell you how much it means to me that you're tuning into this episode of Inside Shapes News by Kilkaya. This podcast is all about the conversation with those shaping the future of news and journalism on topic that truly matters. Now, I want to make a little deal with you. I'll promise I'll keep working to make these episodes better and better. And if you could just do me this small favor to follow, like, or subscribe wherever you're listening into this episode, that would mean the world to me and allow me to continue producing this. Now, onto the podcast. Lars, you worked in journalism for years. What got you interested in understanding audiences and their needs?
Well, we could spend the next hour talking about just that. But to keep it short, I think it was like, I know it's always interested me in like the journalism we do. How is it consumed out there? And I tried for many years to get it sort of into journalism, working at various publishers. And at some point somebody says, well, fine, do it. Talk to the audience. What do they need? And then I was like, sure. So what do you think we should do? So not a lot happened. And what has happened since then is that obviously it's actually really going places in the industry. But that's also because we have like tools and structure now. So since then I found the value proposition canvas, which has helped me immensely, which is great for doing products and on a higher level. But obviously when you need to get into and work with journalists on a day-to-day basis, that's when I found user needs, which is like that really fits into that. So it's a way to go from just talking about user needs and addressing the audience and their needs and pains and gains and so on, into actually like doing it in journalism.
And you have the pleasure every day to work with journalism, but it's also, we both know, hard work. And I think that one of the things that getting to know you a little bit through in the work into this podcast, you even introduced me to the term here, user needs in journalism. Can you explain what it actually means in simple terms, and maybe some examples of what it is and how to use it?
Yes. I can give it a shot, certainly. So what it is basically is, if there are anybody listening used to working in product management or something like that, you have a simple model, as I mentioned, called the value proposition canvas. So what you basically do in that model is that you try to understand your users, you talk to them, you look through data. So you sort of try to find out what are their jobs to be done, what are they trying to achieve each and every day, and what are their pains and gains associated with that. So that's both pains and gains associated with using your product, but also about like just living their lives in sort of like context where your product or content could be relevant. And then you basically mirror that into a value proposition. So you say, okay, how can we remove those pains, and how can we enhance those, remove the pains and enhance the gains, or create new gains, which we know that our users will benefit from because we actually, like, we talk to them, we understand them. And then you map out what kind of product or services and so on you need to build. So it's basically about taking that way of thinking, which, as I just said, is like, that does not work in a newsroom on a day-to-day basis. If we were about to do a newsletter together, for instance, it would be the perfect approach. But it does not work in everyday journalism, and I know that because I've tried, like, as a consultant, implementing it in various places, and it does not work. So what user needs is that it's a model which takes, it's in the name, takes the need of your users, and then what you actually do as the first thing is you analyze your content through those needs. So what we've done here at Berlingske, and which I also did before starting here, was that I sort of copied or used the same model as they did at the Wall Street Journal, which is sort of a further development on the original BBC model. And so there are some, and the reason why I like that model is that they added some user needs called Connect Me, which we see as people stories, where you're getting connected to another individual or to a community, for instance. And then they added this Give Me an Edge. So for Wall Street Journal, that's about like if you're an investor, you need the right information as quickly as possible. For us, it's a bit different. So, but it's still about helping people. In the end, it's about helping people making choices in their everyday lives. So that's what it's all about. So in the old days, you will sort of go through the jobs to be done model and the value proposition canvas, but all of that thinking is sort of included in this way of doing it. And what you then do if you actually manage to get user needs implemented and get to that point is then that you start using it in the journalism. So you're going to get a lot of insights when you do the first analysis on your journalism through user needs. Tom, one of Berlingske's editors-in-chief, calls it, he says that user needs, it's a prism, and that's an M on the end, not an N. It's not a prism, it's a prism. And I really like that way of looking at it, because in the end, it is about when you do your analysis, instead of tagging the stories based on how you decide that it should be, whether this is an analysis, this is a reportage, or whatever you call it when you go places, you instead tag and map them based on what they do for the user. So that's the major difference. And it sounds so simple, and it at some point also really is, but the insights you get are like really, really interesting. So it's about, like, if you imagine that you have this cable flowing with all these data and insights, you need to plug that back into to the newsroom to sort of
I love that analogy.
Act on that learning. Otherwise, you're just going to have a cable lying on the floor with insights and data running out of it to no use. So
it's super interesting on that fact. And like we both gone to the different conferences in the industry, and you always get inspiration from others. And as you said, from the Wall Street Journal, in this case, you had that user need model that you found interesting. For me, I think it's, of course, we have publishers copying different styles here and there. But I think one thing that I learned from you is that user needs doesn't need to be set in stone of what somebody else is doing. I need to do that. It's about finding, okay, inspiration, but I need to tune that to my content, my editors, and so on.
Yes, you certainly need to be aware of that you don't end up implementing what other publishers are doing, so their culture and their way of doing journalism. So I tried both the Wall Street Journal model, obviously, but also the original BBC model, which was developed by Dmitry Siskin while he was at the BBC.
Shout out to Dmitry.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. He's like the founding father of behind all of this, and a great guy as well. So and I tried analyzing with both that model and then the Wall Street Journal model. And at first, because I worked with niche professional publishers back then, I thought, okay, so the Wall Street Journal model is like for these professional B2B niche publications, and the BBC model is for B2C publishing, where you're actually read by, everyday humans. And then found out through analysis that the Wall Street Journal model was also the best one for that, what we call like normal newspaper journalism. And I think it has to do with like what we see working in Danish media, and probably in Norwegian as well, is kind of journalism that the BBC doesn't do. So, for instance, they didn't have a Connect Me user need because they don't do people's stories. They certainly don't do them a lot, and the same with Give Me an Edge, really. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with like implementing or using the user need model from a different publisher. Of course, I say that because we implemented the Wall Street Journal model. But you need to be careful that you're not like implementing it in a way so you're looking at your own content, your own journalism through the wrong prism, because then your insights are going to be wrong as well. So the way we do it is that in the Wall Street Journal model, there is a user need called Help Me Understand. So what we need to do in order to, as you say, fine-tune that to Berlingske is to look at what I call like the layer below. So it's like, okay, so what kind of topics, but there are also different ways and different formats. and that really goes for all of the user needs. And then that's been our strategy for like using a model that is out there and that is well documented and has worked for others, but still doing these slight tweaks to make sure that it works for us. So we're not working for the model, because that's not the way you want it to be. So we constantly try to be on that. So we have the major level, which is the 6 user needs, where we only focus on 3, which is something I hear from other publishers as well. You end up focusing on a few, and then we can take that dive when we need to look at sort of the Berlingske way, and the way Berlingske do their journalism is like really ingrained in our way of doing it, because Berlingske is they're really self-aware, and they've spent a lot of time and resources on actually getting to know, define what kind of publisher they are and who their audience is. So it was also like, I can't take any credit for that work, but I certainly benefited from it when we started working with user needs, because it was easier to put user needs on top when you meet a publisher that has already done all of that work and have a desire to sort of get to know the audience even more, and then use that knowledge in the reporting. So what they saw when I showed up with user needs was that I think they saw like sort of the missing piece of the puzzle, the missing link in going from what we in Denmark call the toast speeches, like where you toast and say, now we're doing audience first journalism and so on.
I'm well aware of that one. It's very good.
yeah. And going from that to actually doing it, and I think in the whole mad equation of journalism and society and the audience, I think that's where user needs really has a lot going for it, in the sense that it's simple.
Can I just add to that also, Lars? I think there's also been a little bit of the evolution that we've seen now the last couple of years, from going from an industry that's been very focusing on advertising. Still, advertising is key revenue source, but moving into subscription, we've been more and more better at than focusing on things that maybe not page you and click, but really getting into understanding what makes reader wanting to come back. And I really want to get into this part of them, because I think a lot of listeners want to understand how you went about this, from maybe a newsroom that was very focused on then looking at just the page views, the traffic, the clicks, and then implementing it. And I've been very lucky to get to know you a little bit through like this process, and then also met you at different conferences. And I heard that you said changing a newsroom isn't just about the strategy, it's all about the culture. What do you really mean by that?
Yeah, so we have the saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is certainly true. And what you're trying to do when you're working with user needs and getting it implemented into newsrooms and other organizations, which can also benefit from this way of thinking, is that you're actually trying to get people to do things which they do every day different. It might be a little bit different, but it's still different. So what I found out, and that's sort of, it didn't surprise me, but then again, it still surprised me that when you start doing this kind of implementation, you are basically doing change work, change management. So everything that we and other organizations throughout the years have learned about change management and implementing change and managing change can certainly be used, I believe should be used in working with user needs. So there's pushback and all that. So in the end, you are working with the organizational culture, and you need to find a way to make it work for you. So it's not something that you're constantly battling with, because I think then you're going to lose. So it's about, obviously, as we've talked about before, it's about getting buy-in from like management. That of course that makes sense. But some of the publishers I talk with are like, yeah, you were really lucky that you had 2 editors in chief who like really understood this and wanted it. And yes, that is true. I was lucky coming to a publisher that had done all that work. But that's not the same as saying that buy-in happened automatically. I think what made a difference for us was that I didn't show up with the user needs model saying, here is a model, somebody else is using it, they seem pretty happy about. I think we should look into doing something along those lines, because that's really like hard for the management to, first of all, hard to see the benefit. And then it's really like hard to grasp, okay, so how do we actually go about using this? Where should we start? So what I instead did was that I showed an analysis of, I think, like 5 weeks of content. The first analysis was just 3 weeks. Then we added 2 weeks, nothing changed. So we kept it at 5 weeks instead of wasting my time doing more tracking, more analysis when the insights didn't change. And then I showed that to the editors in chief. So I think that, of course, they said yes to user needs, but they didn't just say yes to user needs, the model and the approach, but also from the what we could call like the performance gains associated with the user needs, but also how you can see that if you want to be more relevant to your audience and who doesn't, you can quickly and easily see how user needs can help you with that. I don't want to see on that journey, because everybody talks about journeys all the time, but how user needs can certainly help you. And because, again, it is such a simple model, that makes it easy to talk about, and that gives you structure for having a shared language. And that's like one of the most important things in all of this, is to get to the point where you have a shared language. So, for instance, when a reporter and an editor talks about doing a Connect Me story, first of all, it's great that they have the same name for it, but they also need to associate it with the same kind of story. And you need that, I believe, rather simple and easy to understand structure to get there. And then in Danish, I don't know about Norwegian, but in Danish, the words culture and structure rhyme. So we say that you can't change culture without structure.
Same in Norwegian.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I learned a lot of rhymes and sayings as a consultant. So that is one of them, that you can't change culture without structure. And for us, that structure part has really been like having the names or the titles, whatever you want to call it, of the user needs. And then what you then need to add, which is something that we'll perhaps talk about in a minute, is to connect it to the journalism. So you're not talking about, well, let's do Connect Me. Okay, what could that be? Well, let's try this. So what you need to do is sort of connect it to the reporting that you're already doing, because you need to sort of both help start that conversation, but also facilitate it. So you sort of need to connect it to the best examples from your own reporting. So when we talk about doing a great help me understand story, what do we actually mean? Here are some great examples, and how can we do it on a more like, when we're on this single article, what are the toolings, so to speak, that we can use? So you sort of need to connect it into the to journalism. And as change management goes, you need to do that a lot of times.
It makes completely sense. And I mean, for those that said it was easy for you getting the leadership on board, I don't think that's the case. They maybe knew that this was the right thing, but you have to frame this in a framework that is easy for them to understand. And I want to go from sort of getting the buy-in from the leadership here to actually getting this over to the journalists and how to engage with them, because we both worked with journalists a lot, and sometimes implementing change can be difficult. So how do you really help them to see user needs as something valuable rather than extra work that they have to do in the already busy day?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I had some help with that from some of the editors at Berlingske, but to me it's all about like connecting it back to the journalism. And what we've been able to do, because we analyzed our own content, we didn't look at what others are doing. We looked at our own content, own journalism, own reporting, and then found out, based on user needs, where are we performing really well, and what metrics, like, because there's both conversion, but there's also retention. That's also an important part of this. But it's, in the end, it's about connecting it back to the stories and then telling stories about how it can improve the journalism by improving how it is perceived by the audience. So if they get value from it, they are more likely to spend more time with the stories and come back for more and so on. So we're looking at a range of metrics. Again, you don't want to be looking at too many metrics, but I believe that you need to look at more than just one in this case, certainly. So obviously we look at like page views, but then we try to move beyond that because page views is just traffic. It's not consumption. So we're looking at like time spent, but we try to compare it to the length of the article. So long articles doesn't get more time spent, and scroll depths and so on, and then add conversion into that mix. And luckily we were seeing that the stories and the user needs, which were performing really well conversion wise, did the same on some of the other important metrics. So it's like this self-fulfilling, and it makes sense that when you do something and people want to pay for it, it should also be like worth consuming, spending time on. And that's something that we are constantly looking at, because if you see a story or a user need or a kind of story or format which is converting really well, but the consumption isn't there, you need to ask yourself, are we disappointing people? So are we like pay baiting? And if they don't spend time with the story they just bought, that can be a signal to look at. But other publishers where I've been, it was about, and that's where I also think user needs helps us, is that they might do a story, the premium team did do a story which then converted really well, and then they looked at that single story. Oh, this is converting really well. Let's do more of that. Okay, so then you try to look at that article. Okay, what made it sell? And you sort of bet that, okay, it might have been the format. Let's do more of those stories. And that's like, you can in no way be sure that was what made it work. And you run the risk of actually not doing more of the kind of journalism that people signed up for. So you end up by having a huge churn rate because you are constantly looking at what is converting, and then you don't think, oh, we probably need to do more of that because that's what people came here for. And that's also where user needs help us. Certainly when we combine it with the topics we cover and so on, that we can see, okay, we can sort of begin to get an overview of how our readers and subscribers sort of move about in the journalism that we produce. And we can also have conversations around the kinds of journalism or topics that may not be huge paywall successes, but which our subscribers just love to spend time with. So again, as I said before, that's a retention game. So the user needs also helps us there. So it's all about having this shared language about journalism. And then, as you would in journalism normally, before user needs, it's about applying it on the various areas of your business. And on final point, and then I'll stop my monologue, is also that I found out that user needs is really good at combining the business side of things with the journalism side of things. It's been like insanely beneficial to us to have that shared language and sort of use it to connect both the various parts of the reporting and the journalism, but also the business. That's really like where you see that you're going places.
But you're preaching to the choir here, Lars, because I see this in my career working with creating dashboards for the editorial teams, is that it's so easy to just create hundreds and hundreds of dashboards throwing all different KPIs, data points. Mm-hmm. Is that necessarily the right way to do it? I don't think so. So I think that one of the best things is to have a framework that most can understand and then also can agree around. So it's easier than to maybe just have one or two dashboard, which is very clearly what is it that we are working towards and following that way. So it makes completely sense. But then I've also been part of multiple digital transformation projects, and it doesn't succeed at first. And we had this conversation that you saw when you started implementing user needs. You mentioned in our prep for this that it didn't really change anything at first. Why was that, and what finally made this work, or is it actually working at this point, or are you still evolving this?
I'd say we're still evolving, and I think we always will be. That's the easy, cheap answer. So what happened was that we did workshops, and I think it was 2023, the spring of 23. We did workshops across all the sections of Berlingske, and there was buy-in, and we did it. I think we did it all the right way. We can get back to what some of the actual exercises we did, which I would recommend others do as well. And it was both great fun, and there was awesome conversations happening, and the reporters were on board, and the editors as well. And then we finished that sort of role of workshop, and as you said, nothing happened. So, and this is where sort of my role is in the commercial department, so it's not in the newsroom. So I'm sort of I have to constantly try to figure out how is my way into this organization. Not that I'm a spy or anything, but it's I need to play by the rules, otherwise someone's going to show me the door. And so it was all about trying to find out that, are they aware that nothing has happened really, and where are we going from here? And then I had a check-in with a guy called Jacob, who has been really important in all of this. He's the head of editorial development at Berlingske. And he had talked with the two editors-in-chief, and they had seen the same thing. So he came to me and he says, we have sort of the perception that nothing has really happened based on data. Is that true? And I could say in 2 seconds, that is absolutely true. So both where the stories are published and how they are performing, nothing has changed. So that was really good, and it enabled us to have a conversation around what was missing was this translation into journalism. So actually going from, as I said before, all the fine speeches, and then actually going to do better journalism, more relevant journalism based on this. And I thought that we had done that in the workshops, but obviously we hadn't done a good enough job. So what was done instead was that a few editors were selected to make that translation. I wasn't part of that work, and that made complete sense. Both because I don't work at Berlingske, I work at Berlingske Media, sort of the corporation around our publishers, and also this was the time for User Needs to become Berlingske, a Berlingske thing, so to speak. So a lot, as I talked about before, the fine tuning and all of that happened during the implementation actually happened at that time with the editors doing that. So both about finding the good examples, finding the best performers, finding the not so good performers, but constantly going back to examples, and then also approaching it on which I thought was absolutely brilliant, by in making it sort of in the spirit of give me an edge, actually helping reporters in almost as a checklist. Okay, so you want to do this kind of reporting or this kind of story? Well, maybe think about doing this or asking about this and so on. And that made all the difference because now it became actionable. And when I was not part of the work, but I was part of the group which they presented it to, which I was really humble about. I've been let into some really editorial only rooms, you could say. So I'm really humble about being allowed in that room, all those rooms. And what I saw was that, and this is not to say that I'm God's gift to the industry or User Need, but I just saw that they had taken it somewhere where I could never have done that, never. And I think that's because they are Berlingske people. They have been working for Berlingske. Some of them a lot of years. They know both the publisher and the people, the organization and the audience. They know all of them so much better than I do. So it was almost this chilling moment where I thought that, okay, now it's becoming this Berlingske thing and not just Lars from commercial pitching something.
But it also gives you the opportunity to get feedback on the different parts that you're doing, and it's also not a forced way to do it. So I think it's absolutely a good way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would recommend any publisher looking into this to make sure that they do that, to do it that way, because you need to make it into your own. And if you can't find the examples, and so maybe you're on the wrong user needs model, or you're doing something wrong. Because if you can't find the examples in the reporting that you've already done, that's then something is wrong. And we were fortunate enough, or not fortunate enough, but what we've done like multiple times is tell them that what we're asking you to do is not something new. It's something that you've done before. So it's like the stories that are really performing was published by you guys. So you did this before. So in the end, what is being asked of you is not to invent something new. That's not what user needs is about. But or it can be, but it wasn't for us. But to go back and do more of the things that the audience finds really relevant and useful and want to spend time with in the end, and maybe do a little bit less of the things that they don't want to spend time with. Or I would always say not doing something is like that's the last resort. So you want to try to fine tune it. So based on what we found out by analyzing user needs, these kind of stories that may be struggling, is there something we can do based on that learning before we stop doing it? Because as we say multiple times, we are reporters. This is journalism. We're not running a web shop. So there is all of that important element in the equation.
On your point here, I mean, we say news, but we're really in the business of journalism in the end of the day here. But then one thing that I find interesting working on the software side, but then focus on then journalism and news, is that I very often see that you need within the organization to create hype around what you're doing. And one thing that I often have done is then in the common Slack groups or the other things, I just share what I'm actively doing. One thing important, because I want people to understand what I do, but one of the other things is FOMO. And I think you and me discussed this, that you were actively writing almost weekly or monthly in this team Slack here about this work to get people to, user needs, Lars. Maybe I do have a cup of coffee with him in the office. Can you just share a little bit? Because I find that very important to get people around. Yeah, of course.
I've written about an article about it as well for those who are curious. So what I did after we did the workshops, and I did it because I was asked to. So Tom, one of the editors-in-chief, I started sending him and the rest of on that level, editor-in-chief level, just send them a weekly email. So we've done with the workshops, and here's how we are performing on user needs behind the paywall. And I should add that for Berlingske, we only look at content behind the paywall, but when we tag on user needs, we only look at what's in front of the paywall, because we want to look into the decision that the user is making, whether to buy or to log in or to start reading the article in front of them. So we only look at headline, subheadline, and then the beginning of the text. So I did an email about that, and then I sent it to the editor-in-chief, and Tom writes back to me that this is like really insightful. Can I get you to send it to all of the editors? And I was like, you don't need to say that twice. So the next email I sent it to all of them, and I made sure to tell them why they got it. And this. In the end, I found out that this was a really good time to do it because it was after the workshops. So this was like right between, the happy days of the workshops and the not so happy days of seeing nothing happen. So that's when I started doing this weekly newsletter. And I still do. Before I got on this call with you, I sent out this week's newsletter, which then looks at the week before. So that's week number 8 for those of us who count in week numbers. And it's kind of its own little success story, I think, because it doesn't just go out to editors. There are also reporters and sub editors and so on. And I have never added anyone by just thinking that, well, this person should definitely get this email as well, but only by request. So all the sub-editors, almost all the sub-editors have written back to me saying, hey, I've heard about your newsletter. Can I be added to the list? And I was like, okay, sure. But also reporters and so on. And it's for me, it's like important signals in how user needs is being implemented into the organization. So when busy people reach out to you to get something from you every day in their inbox, which is probably one of the busiest places on the planet, that says something about that it's giving them a ton of value, and they are having conversations around it. So obviously you want as many as possible on that. And we've had like various conversations on like the format of that newsletter. And for now, it's me, based on my conversations with them, but also being on the commercial side of things, it's me, I'm sort of an editor. So I think I try to pick what's the most important stories. And in this week's newsletter, there were like 5 insights, and one of them was about one of the sections which has performed really well. So it's also about like sharing success stories and so on. And yeah, again, we've been talking about having a format, and I'm like, whatever you want to do, I'll do it. But I think for now that, as you said before, in a world of dashboards and so on, I think that there is this element to it that I think that I know from some of them, so that they prefer actually having, I don't know if the word is condensed or edited, look into the performance of last week, because we are constantly looking at, and I think every publisher is nowadays, constantly looking at the performance today and yesterday. And how are we on budget? And what about tomorrow? Do we have enough stories ready to perform? And to get sort of that semi-outside look on the reporting that you're doing with like simple, and I think I've gotten better at writing that email based on feedback, because it can get really long sometimes. So I have to sort of eat my own medicine and listen to the audience here. So it's but yeah, they appreciate it, and I always make sure to sort of do other emails when, for instance, for this editor where they have performed really well, I wrote to him like separately with the same charts and so on, because then I could ask him, hey, would it be okay with you if I used you as an example in the next email? So that kind of communication has a lot going for it, and it sort of reminds me of an article from HBR that I read a couple of years ago, where they found out that one of the most important things when executing on strategy is like information flows. So, and that's what this internal newsletter is all about. It's about information flows. So you make sure that the right insights, the right data flows to the right people at the right time, so they can make the right decision at the right point and time in the organization. So
I love that part. I mean, when Tom, the editor-in-chief, says, "You maybe you should write about this," you hold my beer. I'm going for it.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like it's so important to get that buy-in from management. But you also you need to do. This is going to sound the wrong way, but you need to do an effort to get that buy-in. You know, nobody wakes up just to think, oh, I might be introduced to this random model today, and I need to say yes. So you need to help them make that decision.
And we discussed this a little bit, and one of the things that we now established is user needs and how you brought it into Berlingske. But before a newsroom fully can embrace user needs, the first step is making sure that the tagging is right. And in Kilkaya and analytics, as we know, tagging is everything in terms of how we view the data. And without accurate tagging, the insights become unreliable and decision really based on wrong data.
Yeah, so the tagging part is done by me. So that's like me going through what they published the prior week. And as I said, we only look at like what was published behind the paywall. So that's like around 300 articles a week. And then we only look at what's in front of the paywall. So I don't have to read the entire articles. And what that has enabled us to do is to have, like, I would believe, much more informed conversations, because when I did workshops, but also like tons of conversations with them, we we all want examples, right? When somebody asks us to do something different, we're like, well, can you give me an example? When we did the workshops, and when they said, well, could you give me this example of what is a Connect Me story for us? And I said, sure. And I could give them 3 examples from the week before, because I had looked at that reporting. And at some point, you also, when you sort of get to that level of trust with them, you also become sort of an advisor to them. And you need to have a certain level of knowledge there. And as publishers I talk with who want to get into user needs are like, some of them are looking at like an automated solution. That's perfectly fine. But when you automate, you always need to think about that you're losing something. So you're going to lose something when you automate, and it can be something that you're perfectly happy losing, and then it's fine. But what we got by actually doing the manual tracking is to have like these better conversations and more informed decisions. And it also, there's a risk if you want to automate this kind of tagging, is that the algorithm that is going to do the tagging is trained on something. So it's both, you need to be like really careful on what has it been trained on. Is it trained on reporting that is somewhat similar to the stories you are doing? And what user needs model is it like trained on or used to using? Because when you do, like as we talked about before, doing fine tuning and so on, going back to the example of the BBC model, like that was an obvious example that you could end up implementing the wrong way to look at your reporting if you're not reporting in the same way as the BBC. So doing automation or automated tagging sort of opens the door to making this error at scale. So it's in the end, it's all about like data quality and having trust in that you trust in your data. And for us, making sure that we could trust the data was like doing it ourselves, and still do it ourselves. We are looking into like, where do we go from here? There are multiple ways to go. There are automation, but there is also having the reporters do it. And the benefit to that is that you sort of need to, then I hope that it could easier become an integral part of the commissioning of stories, because that's where you want to be. You want user needs to be in that conversation when the story gets commissioned. And if the reporter has to sort of register in the CMS what user need he or she is publishing on, that increases the likelihood of that part of the conversation happening. So for us, it's like, it was about not introducing like other publishers' journalism and other publishers' way of looking at this. And I still do it, and it's not like that big of a burden. And when I talk to publishers, especially smaller ones, because they think that maybe we have like maybe we have an entire regiment just dedicated to user needs, and we don't. So usually like smaller publishers also tend to have like a lower cadence of publishing, which actually makes it an easier task to do the tagging yourselves. And then I would also say that even if you're doing the tagging yourself, if you don't have someone from commercial to do it, the things you'll learn about your own reporting and how you sort of publish them and actually do stories in the end, looking at them through the prism of user needs is bound to give you some interesting insights. And it's also during that tagging phase that you maybe realize, wow, we do a lot of update stories, don't we? And you also see how one story is being unfolded across multiple articles. So there could also be some learning in there for you. So in the end, it's about also using it as a chance to like look at what you're producing, and then look at it through these user needs. So I would that's where I would start.
I think it makes completely sense. And just being on the software side, I think very often we have a tendency of then do automation, this is going to be good. But you highlight a couple of things here that I find important, because I've been in the game here with natural language processing for quite a while and seen how this is both positive things, but I also see the negatives of this in terms of then automating just the tagging and the other parts. One thing that you told me that sort of made me rethink is it's sort of not maybe the right way to build a user needs model based on something generic, because this is unique for every publisher. So it's going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you sort of need to sort of keep it in mind. And I've talked to publishers who had like done the automation to sort of, because it makes perfect sense that if you automate your tagging process, you can get to a decision faster. It makes complete sense. But if you then like look at the data you've gotten out of the automation, and you don't trust it, you've actually maybe veered off or got a bit farther away from having that that decision. And remember, for us, the first decision was made on like, I think it was 5 weeks, maybe 7, but that, you know, that's not like thousands upon thousands of articles, because if you are a publisher, you tend to follow a rhythm and a way of doing things. So you don't necessarily need to look at everything you've published since you were born. I talked to a smaller publisher last week, which like they have a low cadence. So I actually said, I think like when we did the counting, I believe that you could like easily tag everything you published the last year, because it's just so worth it. And I always believe that the technology decision should be later in the process. So first you want to find out, what do you actually want to achieve? What needs to change? And how do you need to work with that in the organization? And what technology can best help you get there? And if you do it that way, for instance, if we were to do automation, we actually have, I've lost count, but now we have a lot of articles, maybe like 35,000, I can't remember, but which is tagged on user needs based on the way we do it. So there's also the possibility of training an algorithm based on that. So there's sort of like 2 ways to go in the automation. There's the natural language processing, but there's also the sort of the old model. It was the old way of actually maybe just, we already did this a lot of times. Can we maybe just ask you to sort of repeat that and then check it? So I would much rather automate a process that we have like iterated on and refined and really made work. Much rather automate that than start by automation, because and that's for us. That's been the case.
It makes completely sense, because you want that sort of data learning to be in place, because if you feed algorithms with bad data, it's not the best things. We use the example here. You make an AI to understand what's a husky and what is a wolf, and the AI model would then look at the wolf being those with snow in the background.
Yeah, exactly. And I also I read an example. I think it was in I can't remember his name. A New York Times reporter who did a book on like how can we sort of protect ourselves from automation. And there was an example where somebody wanted to use AI for the hiring process. We have so many candidates for this job. Who should we hire? And then when they looked what the algorithm was actually prioritizing, it turned out that some of the most important signals was that the applicant was named Jared and played lacrosse in high school, because based on the data it was trained on, that was like the highest performers. So yeah, you don't want to go Jared, the softball player from high school, in your user needs tagging, because you are going to make some really important decisions on how you want to go forward and how you want to provide value to your audience based on that data. I'm not saying that you should not automate, but you should keep an eye on those like pitfalls and try to mitigate them in various ways.
I completely agree, and we're not saying that do not automate, but I think also we're saying here that there's things that you need to have in place before doing it. And to be honest, doing software sales with publishers, it's very nice when the publisher's done this exercise before going through a process, because it makes it easier also to advise on the right steps on how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Lars, now we have the tagging in place. We have the understanding of having that. I want to really now get into the understanding of then applying this in a meaningful way into Newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go through the whole thing. And you have a simple exercise that helps Newsroom understand user needs. Can you walk us through how it works and why it's so effective?
Yeah. So what I found out works best is that you sort of need to demystify user needs. Those of us and the listeners who are like working with user needs know this already, but it's not rocket science. It's journalism. But like when you introduce something new to an organization and to reporters, they are going to be like, oh, not again. What are we now being taught? And I've been through that myself, so that's a complete valid reaction. So it's about really quickly going from them not knowing what it is and to like as I said, debunking the myths and saying it's basically just about looking at stories and based on this set of user needs, try to find out which one fits the most. And if you do a more like fine-grained tagging, you can say, well, it's mostly this user need, but it's also this. And when we do the tagging, we say like, obviously this story is on 2 user needs, but it's mostly on this. And that's like mostly for analytics purposes, but we have conversations around it. So you need to get there quickly. And it reminds me of something I learned at a project management course years back, is that there are 3 types of resistance. So there is the, I don't understand the project. That's the first one. And that's the one we're addressing here. So because we're going to hit that immediately, and we want to get it out of the way by just showing them what it is. If we don't do that, we get to the next kind of resistance, which is, I don't like the project. And this is where you sort of need to show them both what it is in terms of journalism, but also show them both like the performance benefits and so on, but also that it makes for better journalism that are easier to get value from. And the third one, and I don't think we're there, some might be, I'm not sure, but the third type of resistance is I don't like you. So that would be me in this instance. And I try to, when I talk to both editors and reporters and when I'm into meetings and so on, I always try to find out whether we're discussing user needs or something else. I always try to find where are we on this scale of 1 to 3. Like, is it because you don't have the right understanding, or you just don't like this project, don't trust it? Why is that? And so on. So what the exercise is in all its simplicity is basically just as a group. So if you're we did the workshops with the various sections of Berlingske. So it's about, we had the editor and the reporters in one room. And then we just went through like 10 to 15, maybe 20 stories that they had published. And before the exercise, I handed out these printed cards, and I cut them myself from a piece of paper. So I printed them in colors and cut them with a scissors. I like that tactile approach. And my colleagues in commercial, when they saw that, they were like, "Oh, you're doing a workshop today? Yep, next one." So they got that. And what I asked them was that, okay, we're going to look at a story that you published. We're going to look at the same pieces of content that I look at when I apply user needs. So that's primarily the headline, the subheadline, and the image or photo, and in some cases the beginning of the body text. And then I say 1, 2, 3, and then you just hold up the card with the user needs that you think apply the most to the story. And if you are in doubt, you can hold up 2, maybe 3, not 6. And so we did that, and that served multiple purposes. As I said, it sort of demystifies user needs because they are actually I'm sort of crowdsourcing user needs tagging here, but also showing them that it's not black magic. It's just that. And what it also does is that it gets the conversation started, and that's what you really need. You need the reporters and the editors to talk amongst themselves about their reporting through user needs. So what someone always would ask if we found out that a story was on a certain user need, and maybe it was not one of the user needs that we found out were performing best on the paywall, someone would ask, well, if we were to do this on another user need, how could we do it? And I could have a guess or an answer for that, but I'd much rather sometimes leave it in silence or maybe ask the room. That's a good question. Do any of you have any ideas? because then you're sort of getting started on having these conversations. And once they start talking amongst themselves on how to do the same story on a different user need, you are like, it's baby steps, but it's the first necessary steps in order for them to start working with and thinking in terms of user needs. And what it also, the third thing, and that's for me, that's beneficial to me, is that I would bring some of the stories where I was in doubt. And I like being in doubt. That's also part of journalism and user needs. And then I would bring that into the room. And I didn't tell them beforehand, but used them as examples. And then I could easily look out over the room full of reporters and saying, "Oh, you're okay, yeah, the room is blue, and that's our color for help me understand. Yeah, I was on that as well. Okay, check." So it's also about like constantly being sure that because they sort of outsourced the tagging to this human algorithm, me, it also gives me some like security in that, okay, we have the same like picture of what a given story is when we look at it through user needs. So and it's also, my experience is also that it's a fun exercise because they get to participate and they get to talk about journalism. And what we found out is that this is no surprise to any of us, but funny enough, reporters like to talk about journalism. So it's also about having a room where you talk about journalism, and you do it through the prism of user needs, but in the end you're talking about journalism. I like to say that working with user needs and having it in a newsroom meeting is not going to help you achieve something that you couldn't have achieved with a really well executed newsroom meeting in the 70s. But it gives you a structure, and it certainly increases your chances of getting those important stories into the conversation and having them published. So that exercise like plays on a lot of things. And another exercise we also did was that and I've written about this as well in my newsletter, if there's anyone out there curious, is like a simple table where we have the user needs. We have the user needs on the vertical in the rows, and then the columns can be based on what kind of publisher you are, but it can be either topics. We did topics for Berlingske, but if you're like a niche publication who are thinking more in terms of target audiences than topics, then it's your target audiences. So the first time I did that exercise was actually with a small publisher where we had like, these are the 3 strategic target audiences. Let's map that out and have an idea session based on user needs. And that was really powerful. So the editor walked away with like 10 story ideas. So I think that workshop that meeting or ideation process was also helped by like some gin and tonics being made on the side and served. That certainly kept the ideas flowing. But obviously you don't need that, but it just made it more fun. So
no, Lars, on this. So bring out the gin and tonic, bring out the color cards, and let's go.
Yeah, and it's to have some fun on a Friday afternoon. Because if implementing these things is all just a major hassle, why bother? Then nobody's going to. It should be like, they should have an element of enjoyment, or if not outright fun, then at least it has to be like sort of like worth doing and something you look forward to. So
we're spending so much of our life at work, so why not make it fun in the end of the day? So yeah. One thing that I found interesting, you explaining with the cards and almost like, what do you feel about this article? And I put it out, is sort of reading the crowd. And I wouldn't be doing this right if I would know something about you that we didn't discuss. But I know you've been very good at reading the crowd because you used to be a DJ, didn't you?
Yeah, in the old days. And there is a certain similarity, and I'm better at it now than I was as a DJ, because as a DJ I was the artist, I was the one who got it. So the music I wanted to play was like the best music, and the audience should be so lucky that they showed up at the nightclub the day I was playing, because oh boy, I was gonna take them on a journey, and that is not how it works. So for reporters and me, sort of the DJ reference is in the fact that you usually know the first track or maybe tracks you're going to play, and then you can have like 10 records that you like, I want to play this throughout the night. this is perfect for when the crowd needs to start moving around like 11 or midnight, and peak hour 2 a.m. These are the records. But you can't be sure that that's where the party is heading, and that's the benefit of being a DJ, because the audience is right in front of you. And if you're playing something they don't like, they tell you by leaving the floor. And no DJ wants an empty floor. So what you find out is that you need to play to their knowledge and strengths and so on to get them back into the floor. And then you can sort of slowly take it into the direction you want, but you constantly need to be in tune with what they want. Otherwise, you're not doing a good enough job and you won't get booked again. So for me, it's always been, and in this process, it's been like that, because you show up with the first analysis, but then what happens from there, it's also about being open to, and this is some of the conversations we're having now in this company as a whole, is about there's a pitfall in thinking that if you show up with, it's like one model to rule them all. And that for me would be the equivalent of coming with a playlist to a party, saying this is the music I'm going to play and you are going to listen. So there's a lot of insight and knowledge going the other way. So the DJ looks at the dance floor, and I look at data and I talk to reporters and editors. And it's funny you should ask, because I've never really thought of it in that way. And and there we have a shared friend,
Jensen NTM, shout out.
Yep.
He also used to be, so there must be something about being a DJ and going into this.
Yeah, and it's great that now we mention him, so I can tag him in the LinkedIn post and bring him into it, because we found out we had a shared past there. So we've like sort of. He invited me into one of his playlists, and there are so many songs that I could recognize. So maybe at an industry event sometimes, a DJ set back to back. Jens, let's make it happen.
I need to get Earl at the Inma on this to have Lars and Jens doing a DJ set here. I think that would be something. So we're most likely gonna expect. So on LinkedIn, you constantly see, here are what running made me learn about B2B sales. So it's definitely coming here. What's DJing made me learn about user needs in this case is definitely coming. But Lars, this is really, really fantastic. And I just want to look on one question that I very often get, is that maybe some of the editors that we implement sort of things like this on, they can feel that it becomes a little bit robotic in terms of having to work. Like, what's your answer to that? I mean, we shouldn't force this, but then I think a lot of editors wants the freedom, the creativity to then write sort of what they need. So why do we need these frameworks?
Yeah, that is a great question. And as we talked about beforehand, I'm really glad that you brought this to the conversation, because it really got me thinking. Because obviously, if you feel that something like this is too robotic, or if you hear from your colleagues that it's a bit robotic, we're losing our edge, we're losing, as you say, we're losing our creativity. That's an important signal to be aware of, because something is wrong. So just to start there by saying that that's not how a user needs implementation or working with user needs should feel. It should be the direct opposite, because we know that creativity flourishes through limitations. So sometimes having limitations, something you have to do in a certain way, can actually make you more creative. So this is not to say that we are limiting journalism, not in any way. But so I would say that there's something that you need to look at if it feels robotic. I'm not sure. I think talking about it a lot based on your user needs can make it feel robotic. I talked to one of our editors the other day, and he says that in their conversations, in newsroom ideation processes and so on, they don't necessarily call them the user needs by name. So there are a lot of ways to talk about doing a connect me story. So you can say, can you do a connect me story on this? But you can also say, okay, so what are the main characters in this story? Or, okay, who can we talk to that our audience would like to meet or like to hear from or learn from, or something like that. So you can talk about it in that way. And to me, that also highlights that user needs in the end, as I said, it is journalism. So there's certainly a risk there that if you constantly, and this is not contrary to what I said before by having a shared language and repeating that, but you sort of need to feel safe that they might not talk about the user needs as you've written them, And there is a strength to that. That is part of the adoption. And then I think one of the things we've, as I said before, spent a lot of time and resources on is connecting it to the reporting. So it's always about connecting it back to the story and then talking about why did this story work? Look at the user need, look at the story, look at the performance. And then to use it as like a creativity. So I'd say that working with formats is a good idea, but it should not limit you. So if you end up doing all of your stories on like inspire me, or help me understand, or connect me, if you end up doing it the same way with the same recipe, obviously that's going to feel robotic. So I would say don't do that. And that is not the similarities that the users prefer. It may be in some cases when you find the right formats, explainers and so on, it makes a ton of sense. But you don't want to scale something that actually pushes the audience away from you. So I would say it's about constantly connecting it to the actual reporting taking place. And I would say, and I'm not sure if we are like, this is certainly an area where I would like to work more. It's in the ideation process. So use it there. We have some of our editors are really good at it, and about getting the user needs into that discussion, because then you can also see how it can sort of help you. And there are multiple ways to sort of do an article on a given user need in a combination with a topic. So there's also, I believe there should also always be room for experimentation. Like, do we really need to do another timeline, for instance? Is that the best way to let this to publish or to tell this story? So I'm not sure if it's the right answer, but I would say it's certainly something to be aware of. And I think going back to what we talked about before, which wasn't something that I prepared beforehand, but was like, make sure once in a while that you have fun doing this. I'd say that's also an important part to remember.
I consider you very knowledgeable in this field, and looking a little bit into the future. I mean, we're getting closer to understanding our readers more. What do you see as the big new shift in how Newsroom is connecting with the audience? Not maybe now, but then coming in the future, maybe the next framework within user needs. What's your take?
Yeah, that's a big and important question. Right now, what is like buzzing around in my head, and you know, the people who follow me on LinkedIn may already know this, is communities. I think we tried it before. When I was at Actionable, I was part of what we called the Nation, where we did like community building and comments. We did something wrong, and it didn't work out the way it was intended. So as an industry, we've been there before, but the things that are happening now, like with Facebook and other platforms, clearly saying to news media and publishers in general, like, we don't really need you. Like, we don't really like you. And I think every publisher has seen a clear decline, and steep decline for some, in traffic from Facebook and the other publishers. Should make it clear to publishers that we need to bring our audience closer to us, and the engagement, conversations, and so on that have been happening on the social platforms, which we have been fine with because we were part of the equation. Maybe we should look into, can we provide the floor or the room for those conversations to happen in our place? And I think a lot of publishers, some are already doing it, so it's not much of a prediction saying that something others are doing is going to get bigger, but I certainly think it is, and I think that it's if you think of yourself as a media consumer, it's like there is a limit to how many publishers you want to like engage with on this level. So I think there's a benefit in doing. You don't want to run head over heels and do this the wrong way. We did that once. But I think there is a certain benefit in doing it, if not now, well, not in 2 years, but start moving in that direction. And it's all about taking the audience seriously and bringing them into the conversation. But it's also about them having conversations on your premises. And I saw somewhere, I can't remember, I think it was the Audiences that wrote about it, based on a German publisher where they found out that the audience actually preferred having a conversation on the publisher's website because it gave some level of trust to the conversation, that it happened there and not on Facebook, for instance. And so going back to what we spent this entire interview talking about is that I think that we would be foolish not to take some of the things that we've learned from user needs and working with it and looking at our content through it and basically engagement metrics on that content, and then adding that to our community work and community engagement work. So that, for instance, be like a connect me user need. How are you being connected to, again, a person in the story, but how are you connected to another member of the audience you're also a part of? It could be someone that you can mirror yourself in. It could be someone that you can learn from, but it can certainly also be someone that can learn from you. So there's a whole new value proposition for publishers there, waiting to be discovered, which is really interesting. So sort of both keep looking at user needs through the content, but also look at the audience and what they do and how they interact with you and each other. Look at that through user needs. I think that is, for me certainly, I think that's going to be like one of the major trends of 2025.
I think you're spot on, and I will have some strong opinions on this, because one of the things I see myself is that, let's go back a couple of years, the news publishers allowed their traffic to come from social networks, where most of Facebook and others had the power of where the users in Facebook got to comment there. That's a missed opportunity that publishers didn't take into account, because I would say, well, it's moderation. We need to be in control, and it's getting way better. But I just see myself reading as coming from the Bergen and on the west side of Norway. I read their Berlingske Media, and it's behind registration and paywall. But oh boy, the comments that are going on there about things happening in Bergen, I subscribe there to see that. But then there's also the point there that everybody now in this business focusing on first-party data, having commenting is a great way to have as a reason to why to register, why to buy a subscription. And we all know registration has a higher likeliness of buying a subscription. Yep. So engagement, and we see this right now in Kilkaya, is that we are getting way more focus on that, also being able to understand the insights from the commenting, also as a way to personalize the articles, because maybe people have more interest. So I hear you.
Yeah,
loud and clear.
Yeah, and it's also about like using that and taking it seriously, and not because one of the areas we did earlier was like having it as something that happened on top of, on next to, sometimes even below journalism, and to sort of give it a life of its own. And then all of a sudden you find out that you are holding it out in a stretched arm away from the core of what you're doing, and that's different. It's not difficult, but it's dangerous to treat it that way. So it's about bringing it back, holding it close to your heart, so to speak. But also using it in your reporting, because I guarantee you that some of the conversations that'll be happening on your like product or premises can make for better journalism, improved journalism. You can use that for the next stories and so on. And that's a good circle to get in, because then the audience can see, oh, they're actually reading what we are typing and saying to each other, and then using it, and they take me seriously. So that makes for a better community. And just to do a quick callback to the DJ analogy, back in the good old days when I was a DJ, and probably Jens as well, that was like Facebook was here, but it was quite new. Then there was MySpace, for those of us who can remember that. But forums. Oh my God, forums. There were so many forums, and they were so good. And that was like community engagement at its finest. So you'd have like these up-and-coming producers uploading their demos for you to listen, and you can discuss on various new releases, and who is Rex the Dog, this new DJ or producer that came out of nowhere. And then when you got into a conversation with one of the sort of A-list DJs in Copenhagen, where I live, that felt amazing as a young kid, flipping records now and then, to sort of and also if you dared post one of your own demos and so on. So that whole experience, which is now like something as fragmented as Facebook, there's just there is a missed opportunity in there somewhere. I think that.
But you're right. You're right, because I think in the end we look for people that maybe have an opinion, or for me to myself make my opinion myself. And I mean, if you look at competition to news journalism today, influencers, I mean, they have a direct relationship with the people that are following them, and I think that's becoming way more to then engage with the readers. And in journalism, we shouldn't necessarily say this is black and white. I want to have enough facts for me to make up my opinion from what I'm reading. And I think trust is the new currency in news, and I would say that. But then, Lars, I just have to gotten to know you a little bit, both from conferences and other places, and also reading on you. I find you incredible to have the knowledge and being able to speak with you. You're absolutely amazing. And for people listening to this, where can I find more out of your work?
Obviously there's on LinkedIn, where I'm quite prolific, and then I also do a newsletter which is in English, which is called, I'm not sure if it's the best name. It's hard to say and hear, but it's productsinpublishing.com. And I start doing a newsletter in English because at conferences where I meet people like you, I found out that there are so many similarities across borders, both in terms of the problems we have, but also like the promises we can see in doing something new. So it just, for me, it made complete sense to sort of ditch doing it in Danish, which was fine, but then starting to have sort of like this, and this is gonna sound a bit lofty, but having a more like being part of a global conversation on these topics. So I would just send that out to everybody listening, that to do that, like try to be part of the international global conversation happening on topics that you are working with, because I guarantee you that you will find at least a handful of people like you, struggling with the same things, being in the same place in the organization as you are. So yeah, in the spirit of connect me, I would say that do that and reach out.
No, it's fantastic, and this is what's all about. And I think the industry is getting way better at sharing the strategies, the work, and so on. I would say, do you collaborate on strategy and technology, but compete on content? That's what we are able to do. So, Lars, we're at the end of this, and you are actually the first person on the podcast. So, congratulations, and I'm honored to have you on this.
Honored to be here.
So, I'm just going to show you something. So, I'm making a closing tradition in this podcast, in this book. Yeah. Is that the next podcast, you do not know who the person is going to be, and they don't know who you are. But you get to ask that question. That person a question. So it's a person in the industry, but you get now to then ask them a question. Since you're the first one, I couldn't do one for you, but you get to ask the next person a question in this case.
Yes. So I've given this some thought, and when I work, and people can maybe get that from hear me talking, I like to be on sort of the bigger lines and like really sort of combine the big thoughts with actually doing things every day. So it's a big question, but it's something that I tend to ask myself. And so the question is, what would you most like to be remembered for when you are no longer here?
Damn.
Yeah.
That is deep.
I will leave it to the person answering the question. If no longer here means no longer in this company, no longer in this position, no longer in this industry, no longer in the job market, or no longer in this universe. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. I've written it down, and the next guest will have it, and then you listen into it and you hear the answer.
And I am now insanely excited about finding out who I just asked that question. It's a fun format. I hope that you keep doing this for long enough for me to be on a second time and also get a question as well. So
100%. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you for your time, and then we talk soon again.
Yes,
thank you to listeners and everybody. Bye.